out there. So
Great.
that's where that's at.
Well, we're very grateful you're here. And I know Dylan's going to keep us on a tight timeline because so that'll be good for all of us to get back into the field or what have you. So
yeah, I mean, I was thinking that, once again, we can keep the conversation pretty loose and just talk through things. I have the document that you shared in front of me as well as those extra pictures, Dana, so I can screen share so folks can look at that if we want. But, you probably want to get back to irrigation troubleshooting before too long.
Oh, I really don't want to, but yeah, good.
Have to, perhaps. Yeah, I hate it when upgrades are like that. But yeah, so we can kind of just dive in, and I guess I was hoping that you could, that document was shared amongst folks and it was quite descriptive, but I was hoping that you could go through once again just kind of brief overview of the goals, why you tried it this way. In particular, I think I'm interested, and I imagine others are as well, of why the combination of no-till rye with the ridge till. And kind of the goals there, what you were trying to accomplish with that. So I will share my screen here. Am I a co-host, Claire?
Oh, sorry. No, but I can fix that right now.
Okay.
There you go, Dylan.
Great. Thank you. So let's see. Uh-oh.
Ooh, spreadsheets.
Yeah, how many spreadsheets can I fit on the computer at once?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so kind of just taking it from the top, the first pictures you shared with me here. Let's talk through this.
And do you have those ones that I shared with you on Instagram in that initial one where it actually has like crops growing rather than just the sort of preparatory blank slate stuff? Or
yeah,
those are in there.
So that's what I've got here, and I can.
Yeah, that doesn't show anything.
I think that's the most recent ones that you shared with me. I don't have anything more advanced than that. I'm curious to hear how it's shaping up when you're in your little drought comparatively. Let me drop a link to this document in the chat so that folks can see that as well.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of more recent pictures. We did an Instagram post like 2 weeks ago, maybe, that I think had, I don't know, a couple more that have like the squash is kind of vining out. A little crops are a little bit more established, I think, than some of the ones in here. But anyway, I mean, I can talk about the kind of the overall approach and what we tried and what we think is working, what we would definitely do differently next year. So do you want me to just kind of launch into that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm struggling to figure out the Zoom and how to see the chat while I'm sharing. But
I don't think you can, Dylan.
Oh, okay.
At least that's not a thing I've ever figured out.
Sorry, give me a second. Okay. All right, and we're back.
Yeah, because those are like, that's like day after transplanting.
Right.
I'm gonna drop a link in the chat to that Instagram story as well, Dana, so people can take a look when they have time.
Okay, sounds good. So this all kind of was like premised upon the I did some work with just like rolled rye and vetch in grad school a few years ago at Iowa State. We just kind of seeded the whole plot to rye and vetch, and we tilled in 3 weeks before transplanting in one plot for a kind of a conventional till control, and we did a strip till, and then we did a no-till that we just kind of like took a coulter and a single shank and kind of loosened up a little band. So there was a little bit of it was like a 4-inch strip till, 3 or 4 inch strip till for like the no-till, and then a more of a foot wide for a strip till. And we planted broccoli and peppers, and we looked at a bunch of different things. And we had kind of, we had like some good success indicators and some failures. And it was kind of like a lot of it seems like a lot of the research that's been done in this kind of, organic no-till, rotational no-till world, where like, it can be done well, but it also doesn't work a lot of times. And we got kind of mixed results. And so the thinking behind this was, the ridges. The idea behind the ridges was to try to just get like a little mini raised bed that would dry out and warm up more quickly. And those are two of the challenges you often have with a high residue no-till system, especially in a northern climate, just getting the soil to dry out and warm up when you want to. And then that's also related to nitrogen availability, because that's really microbially driven. So that was kind of where that came into the picture, to have these ridges. And ideally, for like the peppers that we planted, we probably would have preferred, 2 ridges, maybe 24 or 30 inches apart, something like that. And then something like cucurbits, we would have more widely spaced. But we didn't really have the equipment to do this. We actually just took our like bed shaper mulch layer tool, and we just moved the shaper pan as narrow as it could be. So we were making like a little 12-inch raised bed behind the tractor, and I was just driving as close as I could to the adjacent ridge for every other ridge. So I think these ended up being about 44 inch spacing. So it was really just kind of a proof of concept kind of thing. And so that's where the ridges came in. And some of this, I was reading some of the work that Eric and Ann Nordell have done in Pennsylvania. They've done a lot of cool stuff. They still did some tillage on top of that ridge in the spring. My whole goal was to find something that we wouldn't have to do any amount of soil disturbance in the spring. Because in my experience, on any soil that has a weed seed bank, and ours would certainly be included in that, as soon as you have exposed soil, even if it's a relatively narrow band, then you have weed seed germination. And when you have weed seed germination, you have weed control that you have to do. And by having this surface mulch, you can really no longer do mechanical cultivation. So really the goal was we do the ridges, and then we seeded a row of like tillage radish down the top of each of those ridges, just with a little push seeder, because that's worked fine for this scale. And the goal there, I later put a name to that, and some folks call that bio strip till. So I didn't have that term when we kind of thought up the idea, but I figured that radish will rapidly grow in late August and September. Hopefully it'll sort of dominate the top of the ridge. It'll keep weeds suppressed. I know we often see that pretty well in our just like daikon radish vegetable plantings. They canopy over pretty quick. So we had that seeded, and then we had winter rye broadcast over the whole field. And then the last component, which I'm having some regrets about, but I think I still have some hope in the basic principle. We seeded a light rate of Dutch white clover. We broadcasted over the whole field, and my hope is that the radish would kind of just own the top of that ridge and smother everything out, and we would have a weed free, but with a little bit of radish residue. And I think radish has been shown to have some kind of residual weed suppressive effects. May or may not be technically allelopathy, but sort of has that effect. So and then hopefully we would have all the rotting radish roots would be in the row, having loosened up that planting zone, and maybe we could just kind of no-till plant right into that. That was the original hope. And then the point of the clover was to have it growing kind of in the understory of the rye, knowing that the rye was going to grow much more rapidly and pretty much shade out the clover during the establishment fall. And then the next year, when the rye started to spring up and go reproductive, it would definitely kind of tower over it, and then we'd mow the rye, and that would kind of mulch out the Dutch white clover to kind of continue to suppress it, hoping that all the while it sort of survived in there, but was suppressed. And then as the rye started to break down, or if we had gaps, then it's the white clover that would come through instead of foxtail and pigweed and whatever other annual weeds that we would rather not have, that would be growing tall and going to seed and needing to be pulled. Maybe we'd have a little bit of competition here and there with the clover, but more or less it would be sort of like a chosen, somewhat less benign weed. That was the whole theory. So any questions on I guess that's kind of just the setup for how we came up with this design.
So just to sort of recap what it took to establish this, you were not using any equipment that you didn't already have. It was your bed shaper that formed the ridges in the end, a flail mower to terminate. You broadcast all the seed. Was there anything you did to sort of get improved seed to soil contact? Did you get rain right afterward? What was that establishment like?
Right. We did get rain. Yeah, we did get rain after. I was a little worried. I was thinking about trying to get out there with our tine leader and just kind of lift up the tines that would have been going over the ridges to try to just, because I wasn't worried about the clover germinating, but I was a little concerned about rye. It does like to be buried. And we were kind of in the process of getting that resurrected because we hadn't used it in a year or two, and we didn't really have a toolbar for it. So, I literally was like just about getting it hooked up when it started to pour down rain. So we never actually did do any kind of incorporation over that. But they're like, I think as is evidenced by, we have a couple sections of the field that have like pretty substantial clover establishment, which I'm sure many of you are not surprised about. And so there were some areas that didn't have the greatest germination, but I would say like 80% of the field, the rye took quite well. So we didn't do we didn't do anything. We did tillage in the field before building the ridges. Although we found that that bed shaper did a pretty good job in fairly coarse, not finely tilled soil. It kind of like pulls soil together and presses it together. It sort of does some tillage of its own, I suppose, while you're going. But yeah, and then we just broadcast with a simple like Earthway chest mounted spin seeder, and the row of radishes was seeded with Planet Junior 1 row walk behind push seeder. Of course, I had plenty of ideas for ways that we would be able to scale this and mechanize it more. We could seed the radishes with we have a vacuum seeder for our tractor, but it wasn't necessary for the purposes here. So we had good establishment on I would say everything pretty much.
And you were at about 3 bushels an acre of rye, so heavy kind of no-till seeding rate there, right? And then sort of maybe like a quarter of what would be a full seeding rate of Dutch white clover or something like that.
Yeah. And I would say, I think
ballpark.
Yep, that's the ballpark. The clover rate, I would say I'm a little less confident about. I was hoping for a little less seed out there. So maybe I might have gone as high as 4 or 5 pounds per acre. I think like 10 pounds per acre might be the recommended rate for like a pure stand. So my intention was to have it at like a quarter to a third of the normal rate. It's kind of arbitrarily chosen, but I just wanted to have like enough seeds out there where they would germinate, they would start to creep with stolons, and they would sort of fill in the gaps.
Sure. And can you remind us what the previous rotation it was in this field, kind of background fertility level? Did you do anything to boost biomass?
I did not. No, I have never fertilized a cover crop, although I am, as I think more about using cover crops as like a pivotal component in a mulch based reduced tillage system, I can definitely see the value in that. But this field, I believe, was actually fallow last year.
Okay.
I believe this field was fallow. I think it had offhand I don't remember whether it was whether it had rye the previous year, or I don't think we had any summer cover crop like sorghum Sudan in there. So I don't have a lot of details offhand about that, but nothing out of the ordinary. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. We have a ton of deer pressure at our farm. we have an electric fence that we built, like a 3D deer fence that no longer really does anything for us. So we had a lot of deer in there. They really liked the radishes, so they like cleaned the ridges off of radishes. They grazed down a lot of the rye residue, both overwintered residue and like spring growth residue, and they kind of just like trampled the ridges a little bit. So all of that didn't help us. So we really, there was like just not much evidence of the radish on those ridges in the spring. So that's where this compost thing came in. I was worried, like, I really didn't want to design a system where we had to go and like hand weed around our plants in the row 3 or 4 times when we otherwise would be able to use our tractor for cultivation. And I also didn't really want to disturb that soil too much. And so what we ended up doing, I was actually kind of inspired by, I want to say Broad Fork Farm might be the name of the farm, but he built or had built a compost spreader that's a 3-point mounted thing that he could back it into a pile of compost and then like hydraulically like lift it up and then just drive over the top of beds, and it would like band a really uniform layer of compost. And I've been learning about the deep compost mulch system that, you know, typically is used on a little smaller farms, but can be a good way to basically get rid of your weed seed bank by covering it up with compost. And so I just decided to try it, just like putting down like about 3 inches of compost right on top of each of those ridges where we no longer had kind of any weed suppression from a cover crop. So I just surface applied our starter fertilizer. I reduced it a little bit because the compost would have some nutrient value. And Rue, you are on top of it. So we did that, and then we just transplanted directly into that compost. And it was a lot of work to apply that. It was a hot day, and it was, we were able to get a dump truck load right at the end of the bed, and we just like scooped it up with the bucket and back down the row, and just like 2 of us just shoveling, onto those ridges. And I think it's working okay. I mean, there was no connectivity between the compost and the native soil on the ridge below. So like in retrospect, it might have been beneficial to have just like done a real light like skim cultivation across the ridge to just kind of like break the crust and loosen it a little bit. But I was kind of married to this idea of like not having to really dig in there at all. And so the plugs were really set right in that compost. Admittedly, most of what we planted were kind of leftover plants. Like this wasn't like a fully thought through trial. Like we kind of established these plots. We didn't really have a lot of dedicated transplants to it. So everything was a little bit root bound. And so it probably would have taken a little while to establish anyway. You can see those peppers they're stretched a little bit. But yeah, after about a week, we probably drip irrigated them a couple times to help like really saturate the soil below, and they established. And there's been, relatively there haven't been many weeds. I think there was a little bit of weed seed in the compost. It wasn't really, it was pretty cheap compost from a place that doesn't really do like rigorous temperature analysis and stuff. But I think the basic principle has worked. But the issue is that when we broadcast the clover over the entire field, so there was clover like on those ridges, and most importantly, like right where the rye residue meets the ridge, where the compost like didn't really, like, it's kind of hard to apply compost on top of a ridge because it kind of wants to roll off the sides, so we in certain areas we have pretty substantial amount of clover that's just kind of creeping up those ridges. We just did one like sort of quick hand weeding to pull a few of the annual weeds that had popped through that were going to seed, and here and there where the row was getting pretty encroached on either side, just to like tear some of that clover back to give them a little chance to breathe. So yeah, I think I likely wouldn't put any clover in the rows in the future. You know, we'd have some kind of a segregated seeding strategy so that we wouldn't have the perennial growing right next to where the plants will grow.
You know, it makes me think of using a drill with the boxes maybe separated by species or something like that, or putting in some dividers in there. And typically with a roll dry system, then one of the issues is you've got those, you can, depending on if you're crimping the same direction as you are drilling, then you can get those gaps in the row. But it's interesting with the flail mowing that might not be a problem. So could be a little bit easier. I'm curious with your dry stretch here that you've had, and you know, I know typically one of the major competition issues, particularly with white clover, can be with water, and then that can also be a problem just with rolled rye systems sucking up some of the water in dry years. So what have you seen there in terms of the resilience of this system versus others on your farm?
Well, I can't say that I've done real careful comparative observation of that. I mean, we have this on an irrigation header that has several other fields, and we often just, when we're watering some, we water them all. I mean, you know, they all tend to need it around the same time. I think that the compost seems to dry out fairly quickly. You know, I think compost as a component, as a soil amendment incorporated into soil, should be improving water holding capacity overall for the soil. But right, you know, sitting there by itself right on the surface, you know, it's like you imagine like potting mix. It percolates pretty quickly, and it tends to dry out on the surface. So I'm quite sure that the combination of those factors that you mentioned are causing these to probably dry out more quickly, certainly than like the adjacent like plastic mulch system that we have on one of our fields. But you know, my gut says you're right, but I can't say that we've done anything to really document that. You know, the plants, the winter squash seems to be doing quite well. The peppers are, I would say, they're a little slower to take off than I would have hoped, and some of that might have been the fact that, you know, we put sort of stressed plants in there to begin with, and we're not doing
same fertility rate for the squash and the peppers in this system.
Yep, with that we generally apply 80 pounds of nitrogen to both, you know, peppers and to all of our cucurbits really, and we use the 824 from Sustain, so it gets, you know, whatever the phosphorus and potassium that you get with that. So I think I decreased it by about 25%. I think we put down about 60%, 60 pounds of nitrogen per acre, banded in a 12-inch wide swath right underneath that compost. This is not a manure-based compost. It's a grass and lawn clipping, you know, municipal waste kind of based compost. So the nitrogen levels in there, you know, should be much lower than if we had put a thick layer of compost of a poultry-based, you know, compost or something, dairy-based compost. And just you had mentioned the grain drill with the segregated hoppers, and so that literally is, by the time we're done with this call, that might actually be a reality for us. So both making, you know, about a week ago, I started really thinking about this. Actually, it was kind of happening around when Jeff sent that email with some of the stuff that they're working on over there. Jeff's not on this call, right?
He is not. No, he wasn't able to be here.
Delivering CSA boxes, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been thinking, you know, thinking a lot about both this and a lot of different branches, different ideas outside of this, but a lot of it is based on this idea of having different cover crop mixes for pathways versus bed tops. In some cases, you want like the pathway, the bed top to have a winter killed cover crop if you're trying to plant earlier and you don't want to have a lot of biomass and you're going to do some additional surface tillage or apply some kind of mulch in the spring. In some cases, you might want to have a you know, living pathways basically. So I've got a lot of ideas I've been throwing around, but so this morning, one of my employees built a little hitch adapter that goes on the tongue of or like the drawbar of our tractor, and angles over to the right. And so now our drill can be connected. It's a 10-foot drill. We plant on 5-foot beds, and we have 5-foot wheel tracks. So now our drill actually is centered on the back right wheel. So as we drive down the field, we're going to be seeding exactly two beds worth, and then we'll have these dividers that go in the hoppers, so we can divide both the grain large seed box as well as the legume and grass seed box, and do all sorts of different kind of combinations. So I am pretty jazzed to start experimenting with that approach. So I'm kind of moving away from the ridges, partly because I don't really see a way to do the ridges without like maybe a little more aggressive tillage than I'd like to be doing. Partly because it's kind of hard to establish cover crops when you have that kind of topography across your field. So we wouldn't be able to seed with a grain drill. I think we'd have to continue going with broadcast, make it harder to put seeds, a certain species in one zone and another in a different zone. And I'm just not sure how much of a kind of a warming benefit we got from it. I don't have measurements, but so I'm kind of moving away from that, even though like we're still going to see this through. I may have different thoughts at the end of the year, but it seems like we have a lot more possibilities if we're able to seed with a grain drill. And we certainly couldn't use a roller crimper in this system, although we had another plot that we unfortunately didn't end up actually planting, because it was on another farm nearby. We thought we were going to be renting it, so we established one of these plots there last summer and then didn't end up renting it, but it's still sitting there and just kind of fallow. And I think I have pictures towards the bottom of that, or maybe it was right at the top. It was the one that had nothing in it. Yeah, that one right there. And that one there are ridges in there, and we basically had our rotavator on the tractor, and we had it set. We've got a multi-speed gearbox, so we usually have it all the way slowed down, and he just geared the tractor such that the tines on the tiller were like almost traveling at the same speed as it was traveling over the ground, maybe just slightly faster. And that was rolled right over the ridges too, and it did a very fine job of killing the rye. Now this stuff was able to mature a little bit more than I typically would want to let it. It was probably at least a week past anthesis. And so we certainly have some viable seeds out there. So it's not that hard to knock down rye when it's at that stage, but I was pretty pleased with this. And for whatever reason, we have had there's no weeds germinating in there, almost no annual weeds. And, you can see the clover kind of pushing through here and there. That's more or less what I had in mind with this. Is like, I have no problem with there being quite a bit of green out there in like August and September. In fact, I kind of would prefer that. And at that point, you think it's probably not going to really be competing with your crop very much. So that was kind of what I had in mind. And unfortunately, we didn't actually plant anything into this plot. But I'm just amazed because that soil had a ton of weeds last year. We did grow crops there last year, so sure, the relatively dry stretch we've had, dry for the last 4 weeks, but we had quite a bit of rain in the 2 or 3 weeks before that, and the rye was all terminated before that point. So it's definitely gotten a few good soaking rains since that was rolled down. So it's interesting. I don't have a great explanation for it, but
Dana, can I ask a clarifying question? Did you say that you used a rotavator on the back of your tractor geared down to barely going faster than it would if it were rolling disengaged over the ground? That's how you rolled this, with a almost disengaged rotavator. Okay.
Yes.
And you feel, and it had, because you were at anthesis, you feel like you had good kill.
Yeah, this one that we use, so the plot that we actually planted that has the pictures with the peppers and the cucurbits, that one was just flail mode. This one here that is unfortunately still sitting fallow like this, we were already down at this other farm doing some tillage on the adjacent field, and I didn't want to have Michael drive all the way back up to put the flail mower back on and go back down there. So I said, hey, try to do it with the tiller. And he said he did have to spend probably 10 minutes cleaning stuff out of the tiller at the end of it. So who knows how long you could do that. There was a little bit of wrap.
It picked up some of the residue along the way.
It picked up, but you don't see it. I mean, it really doesn't. It's not evident. There was no disturbance to the soil, and it looks like it was rolled. I mean, it really does. But except for the, since the ridges were there, all the rye that's growing between, which is the majority of it, it wasn't contacting the ground. So there's probably 3 or 4 inches of stem, like that's still vertical, and then all the rye that got broken down and kind of flattened on top of that. I don't know if that could have anything to do with this residue actually breaking down more slowly or doing a better job suppressing weeds, that there's actually kind of like an air gap a little bit. So it's kind of really fluffy. So if you take a roller crimper and you flatten it all and those crimping blades press it against the soil, then maybe you're more likely to both get residue breakdown, but also, like in this case, like I know those seed heads have to have viable seeds on them, and there's like no rye that's sprouting out of them. And I've had that happen in my grad school research. We definitely had some rye that was starting to spread, the whole seed head with every single grain just sprouting. And these are all kind of held almost like in the air. They're not like against the soil.
That's interesting. I imagine that did definitely help, especially with reducing the rye germination. And it's amazing in this picture. I know this was a while ago, but those gaps there where the ridges are still look so clean. So that's really impressive.
I was down there today. They still look like that. I mean, I'm sure you'll find a handful of germinating weeds, but virtually none. I mean, it's remarkable. We've been doing a lot of weeding up here where we've been tilling and stuff, and I know that farm is just as weedy as ours is, and it's interesting.
I tried a similar thing in terms of seeding, broadcasting some clover into where I felt like I had thin stands of rye, and I chose to use red clover because I've heard it's more shade tolerant, and so I figured since I was doing spring establishment that it would establish better, and it's aggressive at this point, and it'll be interesting to see how it shapes up. But speaking of how things shape up, can we sort of fast forward a little bit, and what do you project any impacts on like harvest or anything like that? Where are you going to take this in the rotation, maybe in terms of working up this field or prepping for next year?
Boy, the next year is a total wild card. I have a bit of an obsessive personality when it comes to this stuff, and the last 10 days I just haven't been able to stop thinking and planning all of these. So I'm at the point where what my gut, I want to just go for it and establish. I have 5 different arrangements. I have maps of the grain drill hopper with what species or species mixtures would go in what different the first 4 rows of our grain drill, which would be the first 2 feet, are going to be this one, and all these different arrangements that would be maturing at different times for different cash crops that would and it's kind of becoming a problem, actually, if I'm being honest, where I don't have it figured out, and I'm not sleeping, and I'm so I have no idea what's going to go in this plot next year. One of the issues that I've always had with because we've used, hopefully less maybe than the average vegetable farm in terms of our tillage intensity. We have definitely been a tillage based farm, and so I really want to grow a lot of cover crops to somewhat counteract that, organic matter getting burned up and build some structure back into the soil and whatever. But it just seems like invariably we get to this point where it's now we have all this residue on the surface, all this organic matter that we've built, and too often it just becomes an impediment to our next cash crop, and So I know I've had that happen with garlic, where you mulch it heavily for weed suppression, and then it's like that straw takes a long time to go away. And so we're doing like multiple tillage passes to try to get it, incorporated and get the soil oxygenated to expedite breakdown and whatever, which like feels really contrary to what we're trying to do. So like I'm interested in ways that we can more or less try to leave that residue on the surface, and not. So I don't really know. I certainly don't know what I'm going to plant in this field next year. I am a long ways away from that. And
given how well the white clover is doing in there, do you think that there could be some, management of timing and the zoning of the white clover that could become either a living mulch or perhaps terminated with occultation to get a little credit there or something like that?
Yeah, I think quite possibly. A lot of the different like little production models that I've been brainstorming and working on in my head here, like a lot of those have a mix of clover and some kind of a shade tolerant, low growing, more turf type grass mix, like seeded in the wheel tracks. The goal is like to have most of those when they're established be like 2 feet away from the nearest cash crop plant. So it would take them a while to really get close enough to be competing, I'm sure any kind of plant that's growing in the field is going to be competing for water, because it's, water moves, but hopefully not really crowding it out. So yeah, I think I haven't really thought too much about that, but I think it would be quite possible to do sort of like a strip till system, or maybe if I doubt that by the end of the year the field is going to feel like as clean as I want it to be to like plant a fresh crop into, but I could imagine doing some kind of a shallow till over, at least over the row, to kind of clean that up. And then obviously we won't be able to get any kind of a fall crop in here, so it's probably gonna have to be something next year, but I suspect we're gonna have a pretty solid stand of clover in there. I've been thinking a little bit more about the idea of using landscape fabric for like in the row, so putting a piece of 3-foot landscape fabric over the rows and planting something into it and having that help to buffer the effect of the living mulch between the rows. So I can think of some different ways. Yeah. I think it'd be ideal to try to continue this with something innovative rather than just deciding to disc the whole thing in and start from scratch. Certainly we have these rows are at different spacing than our normal beds, and so we have some different kind of fertility zones, like and obviously with the addition of all that compost, we've got some nice places to continue to plant if we have something that would grow at this spacing, but it's very non-standard for us, so none of our equipment would really work for cultivating and stuff.
Dylan, I have a couple questions, and I'm wondering if we also want to open it up to others.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. If anyone else, I know I can lose sleep over reduced tillage dreaming too, so I want to make sure others have a chance.
I have a really quick question. So in this photo, this is one of the fields that was flail mowed,
Yeah.
and that residue is larger than I would expect from a flail mower. Was it a special flail mower?
It's an old John Deere 26A. No, not a special flail mower. It might have. I've been reading about this, and I've heard like some equipment like says that it's going to be like, it's going to bring things down to like 1-inch stem length to like pulp, which wouldn't be good for this. I don't know how fast Michael mowed this, but I'm sure we were going, just slow enough so that we didn't like have belt squeal and bog down the thing. It's not a particularly big one, but there's nothing particularly unique about it.
We have an old flail mower that I picked up last year, and I mowed a bunch of rye down with it this year just to incorporate, but I know, well, actually what I did was I seeded cover crops in and then mowed it down, and I had much the same long stems. I think, if you're mowing something that's 6 feet long, by the time you pass over that, you haven't really gobbled it all up. We also have a flail mower for the BCS though, and I mow between plastic beds with that, and that does reduce it to like a pulp, like you're saying. I mean, that's just, you go slow, but that's green. It's not at all strawy sort of stuff. And so, yeah, I think you're right that for this, it would work better. And then I might've missed it. My phone died. So did you find that the flail mowing worked pretty well? And did you have trouble with like clearing that off the top of the ridges afterwards, or did it sort of settle in the aisles?
It was a combination. So the original intention was that we would have some rye in there. The radishes would have kind of suppressed stuff. So there was definitely some rye on top, but a lot of those had been grazed pretty bare. And the rye didn't establish very well just because we broadcasted it and just got rained on. So kind of a lot of seed got pushed off. So once we made the decision that we were just going to be putting the compost down and that was going to be our tool, kind of our mulch on there, we did actually go through just with metal rakes on some sections. Some of the sections really didn't need it. Like I wasn't worried about having like a little light layer of some straw on there, but where we had there were sections that maybe had a couple inches of pretty decent residue. So we did actually go and just kind of pulled it to the side, like just a little bit. It was still almost like right on the shoulder of the ridge. So yeah, we did that, and it wasn't really too time consuming. It's not something that I would like to have part of the plan, and but it's what we did just to try to make this compost thing work.
And then if I can just keep going, I don't know if
anybody
has a question, sorry, but why the ridges rather than in flat ground?
Yeah, the basic idea was so that we would try to have an elevated planting surface that would warm up and dry out more quickly. The same principle as of using it. It's just a mini raised bed, because that's one of the issues that you often have with when you're coming into the spring and like when you're trying to have the soil warm up. You not only don't have tillage that's like stirring it up and oxygenating, but you have this insulative layer. So that was kind of the idea, to try to counteract that just reality of farming with a surface mulch, is that it's just gonna take it longer to dry out and warm up. And that's I think that's one of the causes of a lot of the failures that folks that are working with this kind of system is like, temperature, particularly cooler soils, and then the relationship that the cooler soils has with nitrogen availability, because of the less microbial activity at lower temperatures.
And so even with that, your intention is to give up those ridges in the future. How will you address, which I think is great, that makes life easier, right? How will you address those problems of colder soil and tying up nutrients?
Yeah, I'm not real hung up on trying to use this kind of system for like earlier crops. I guess, I don't know, in my experience, that if we just plan to plant and really if you're waiting for like rye, and especially if you have vetch in the mix, if you're waiting for those to mature to the point where you can terminate them, like you might be able to plant the last few days of May, but it seems like you're pretty much planting the first week, maybe even second week of June. So, I mean, I don't know. I haven't been taking thermometers out there and really measuring, but I don't have a specific way. I guess maybe I increase our cell size so we keep our transplants in the greenhouse a little bit longer. We plant a little bit later, and I don't know. We've been having a lot of hot weather in June. I mean, every year is different. I'm sure we'll have a year where it's just cold and rainy, and it's gonna come back to bite us. This year it wasn't so much like that. So I don't really, I don't really see a way around it. If you're trying to not disturb the soil. If we had a better way to establish the cover crop over the top of these ridges, other than just broadcasting, then I think it would only help to have that little raised planting area to try to counteract those things. But absent that, I feel like we can do a whole lot more without the ridges, and then we don't have to build the ridges in the first place,
Right.
which is a tillage intensive activity anyway. So I'm still kind of interested in this idea. Like I think doing the deep compost mulch again, if there's like an economic local source of the compost, being able to, like if we had a winter killed cover crop in the row and we had, let's say rye with an understory of clover mix in the pathways, and then we terminate that cover crop and we put down compost, 2 or 3 inches of compost, then we've got at least a portion of that's going to be warming up a little more quickly. But I'm really I go back and forth about the compost idea, because I don't really want such an input based system where we have to just like routinely import all of this organic matter, all this material. But I think it could have some strategic. So I'm trying to think about that more. Like if we were trying to adapt this to a direct seeded system, then there's really no way to grow carrots through through straw, Dylan. It's just I just don't see how you're going to do that. So if you're trying to find some, what's that?
Well, I was just going to mention that we stapled some areas. We mowed cover crop and stapled landscape fabric right over top without incorporating it, and that helped warm it a lot. Of course, in some cases too much. I think partly just the like biological activity that then happens that broke down underneath the fabric.
Right over the top of the rye. Yeah, but that's definitely an idea, and I would be a little, if we had like a thick rye mulch, it would seem like, you'd want quite a bit of time for that to break down before you'd want to plant into it. But, if you had a lower residue winter killed mulch, or you had tillage radish in the bed and you had your rye in the pathways, and then you just put landscape fabric down just over the radish portion.
We did that mostly with oat and pea.
Oat and peas. Okay. Gotcha. But that's another way to try to, increase the warming for sure. But
I did have a couple of questions about the tillage radish, actually, since it came up again. So I saw, Dana, that you said the soil was fairly firm underneath that layer of compost. And do you think you would try tillage radish again? Like if you had to plant directly into that, would that have been feasible, or would that have been too firm to really want to plant into?
Well, I guess it depends on what we're planting with. I think that it would have been fine with equipment that was designed for no-till planting. If you had a coulter and a little shank or something, but hand planting would have been a trowel job. So I think a lot the folks like I think Natalie Lounsbury and Ray Weil and others have like done work with tillage radish for like earlier spring direct seeded crops. I think that the deer trampling effect didn't help us. Let's put that out there. But I think that it would have been quite a bit different as the soil is just drying out in late April compared to early June, when it's had a lot of time to just like bake. And our soil, it's kind of prone to crusting, part because of our soil type, in part because of our management, I'm sure. So yeah, it was definitely not something that I really wanted to go and just like put, shove a trowel in there. And I'm sure we could have gotten plants to establish fine, but it would have taken more time. And then I was worried about weed growth in the middle of the rows.
In that other field where you didn't end up planting, and it's just amazing how there is no weed pressure there. Did you have was there the same issue in that field of the deer eating the radish tops down? Because I was wondering if radish residue might have contributed to that, or was that all grazed away as well?
I didn't spend as much time in there, but in at least one occasion when I was driving by, saw like a herd of deer out there, like probably 30 of them. So I would say that it probably experienced just the same amount of deer activity. I mean, I'm sure that like they kind of ate the chomped up the kind of the top of the root and ate some of the remaining residue. Obviously, most of the radish was in the soil, so there could be some of that. I didn't think that it typically had that long of an effect, though. You know, I was sort of thought that it might kind of prevent weeds from germinating for, you know, few weeks maybe after the soil kind of warms up, but I don't know much about it. I've done very little with tillage radish just because I've been afraid of getting, you know, brassicas into our rotation because we already grow a lot of brassica vegetable crops. But
my experience with the tillage radish is that there's virtually nothing left in the spring. I would count on it for very little weed control, but more for like the part you're talking about in terms of loosening the soil. That sounds interesting.
Yeah. And yeah, from what I've read, it's not like residue that I'd be counting on weed suppression. It's like some kind of chemical. Yeah, some kind of chemical. Like it seems to me like it's maybe not fully understood, but anecdotally, there's just less weed pressure where you have like a heavy, you know, you had a good crop of tillage radish, you know, for a few weeks sort of coming into the spring. So if you can get in there and you can seed spinach in there, you might be able to get it kind of germinated and off and running and do kind of one hand weeding pass. And that might be all you have to do. It seems like what they've been trying out there in Maryland and Pennsylvania and stuff. But I don't know much about it. We haven't used it much, but I'm still interested in using it, I think, especially if we're trying to move away from deep tillage and then, you know, having something in the mix that's going to potentially allow us to go penetrate a little more deeply. I don't think I'm really that interested in trying to get like no-till spinach going in the spring. I just think that when you're already fighting like the cold soils, it seems like there might be a way to do it with just really shallow tillage. But maybe it's not the end of the world, and it's a pretty intensive crop. It doesn't take a lot of space, so like I'm really more interested in finding some kind of system that I can apply to peppers. We grow 3 acres of peppers and, you know, an acre of watermelons and some of those bigger space-taking crops. I think we get a lot more benefit. I'm not that worried about like, you know, mesclun mix and salad or spinach and things that we're growing relatively small amounts and getting a lot of value from. But
Tenzin and Natalie, Tenzin spoke up a little bit, but I want to make sure that you both have a chance to ask any questions or say anything before we end.
I guess the main thing I'm kind of thinking through is just different, like really high biomass cover crops that you could use in those spaces. Like I was thinking about buckwheat, and actually as you're talking about these allelopathic, maybe that's not quite the right word for it, effects of tillage radish, experimenting with some of the caliente mustard varieties that are specifically developed to have more glucosinolate in them, which is more for disease management, but it could be kind of interesting to see if there's any overlap there. And would potentially create more above ground biomass, like in the fall. That would
so doing like a
tillage to work it in, but that could also be an interesting thing to experiment a little bit more strip tillage in that system.
No, that's an interesting idea especially I would say for ahead of a spring planted crop where we really didn't want a lot of residue, and maybe we're doing a light tillage pass, or maybe we're putting down a little compost, or maybe we're stapling landscape fabric right over the top of it. But then we've got something that may play a role like that. I haven't done much with I haven't done anything with mustard cover crops on this farm. We did a little bit in grad school, a couple little side trials, but for disease management and high tunnels kind of thing, planting it in, you know, March 1st and terminating it in late April kind of thing.
So that makes me think of two things. And one is you were talking about residue management, where like at some point that becomes, the amount of residue becomes an impediment. And I'm wondering about occultation, which would be obviously something you do on a smaller scale to manage residue, but then also anaerobic soil disinfestation, which I have only read about and have never experimented with. And I'm wondering about that as something that might be worth just kind of keeping as a potential tool in our heads, because one of the potential issues that I think we don't talk about a lot in reduced tillage systems is just the potential for disease development and for populations that we might not, like, hopefully it will be a system where there is enough diversity that pathogen populations are being kept in check. But if that doesn't happen, then what are some no-till responses that we could take to that? And I feel like anaerobic soil disinfestation is something where you've got that combination of dealing with the residue as well as hopefully having some disease control.
So you're thinking about
incorporated?
Say that again?
Isn't it usually incorporated, the material for anaerobic soil disinfestation?
ASD? Yeah. Oh, I suppose that's true. I wonder if you could avoid that though. Because, you know, this is one of those things where there's still a lot to experiment with. Like, I would not have expected that low, that, you know, almost nil weed pressure in that field that you didn't get to plant. And that idea of, I don't know, I guess I just wonder about having a solid mat on top of the soil with the soil saturation to create the anaerobic effect, and whether that might be enough.
What is anaerobic soil disinfestation? Just in a real quick nutshell, what's the idea?
So you create anaerobic soil conditions by incorporating often a green manure, something that's going to decompose really quickly, and you irrigate the soil to saturate it, and then you cover it with a plastic mulch. So you basically have anaerobic decay happening in the soil. As the decay of the green manure or whatever the material is goes on, that is going to use up the oxygen that is already there. And then because you also have it saturated and covered, you're not going to have oxygen diffusing in. And it's mostly used as a way to disinfest soil if you have a nematode issue or oomycete diseases and some other fairly persistent diseases.
There's some good e-organic videos on it, I think, kind of old ones.
I think, don't you typically add a sugar source as well? Like people add molasses.
Can I ask another question? So we did a similar thing where we just did our regular 4-foot raised beds, and then I seeded rye and peas over the top of it and tried to roller crimp it down with a homemade roller crimper, and it didn't end up working very well. A lot of the rye came back and stuff. So I think the flail mowing might be a good option for next year, but I'm wondering about a easy way to get fertility, because the things that I have down there are anemic and pathetic right now. I did some direct seeded and some cucumbers transplanted. Direct seeded.
So well, in this particular situation, like I said, we just top dressed and then put the compost on. So it's kind of a different thing than trying to no-till plant through mulch. We were actually yesterday, the same guy who welded that hitch on for our grain drill was working on mounting coulters in front of our fertilizer knives. We have a fertilizer hopper that has a couple of maybe they're 3/8 or a 1/2 inch shanks with an oval tube on the back for fertilizer that we've used, but we've almost kind of done it on the surface. We just kind of etch it into there a little bit. So now we have these two spring loaded coulters in front of that I was hoping you'd be able to just kind of cut through the residue and get some fertility down there. Mm-hmm. And this morning I did our kind of pilot trial with it, and I think that the coulters that we have might need to be more like ripple or wavy coulters, something a little more aggressive, because even though it's cutting through, there's still occasionally getting stuff, mulch that's kind of binding up, and it's leaving a little trail. It definitely leaves a little bit of a divot behind. So you probably on a small scale, it'd be pretty easy to just pull the mulch back over that. But I mean, the basic idea of a coulter and a little fertilizer knife, a little dry fertilizer knife, would be a way to get fertilizer through that. If you wanted to get some fertilizer down, like at planting or after planting or just before planting, it'd be a lot easier to do it if you went out there maybe in early May before the rye had gotten too tall, and maybe you want to put a little bit extra on there, and you knifed it in or even surface applied it, kind of on the rows wherever you were going to plant. I thought about that, and then obviously the rye is going to be taking some of that up, and eventually it'll let it back out, but it'll probably take a little while. And then there's just like fertigation or foliar feeding. I wouldn't want to give my crops entire nutrient needs, but I've always thought about that as a tool that we could use if we thought, if we needed to be able to fertilize without like direct soil incorporation, or in a system where we thought we might have a little bit of immobilization because of the rye residue, or like a little bit of competition from a living cover crop or something. It's like, well, we can like preferentially boost nutrients to our crop using one of those tools. So those are a couple ideas.
What kind of fertilizer hopper is that?
The one that we have is made by a little company in California called Clampco. Clampco, yeah. It's like it's pretty much just a guy like who builds them, and but I know Ariel Pressman. He's the one who recommended them to me. Ariel used one, and it's good quality, but mainly it's kind of custom made. Most of the fertilizer hoppers that are out there, like the one that Rainflow would send with their mulch layer or whatever, like they're all kind of assuming you're using synthetic fertilizers that are really high in nitrogen, and they don't put a high enough rate. This thing, we've never moved it more than, it's got a hydraulic motor on it that drives the I don't know what you call them, the little. Yeah, it's not actually an auger. There's individual little like toothed wheels that spin and it just meters it out. But yeah, that drives drives it. We've never moved it higher than like 4.5 out of 10 on the little speed dial. So, and we have 4 outlets on it. So you can have four different tubes coming out. So we can put down a really high rate. So that's what we use.
I'll have to look into that because everything I use, I max it out all the way, and it's never enough.
Yeah. No, we don't have that issue.
Just doesn't work usually.
Yeah. I can connect you with him. If you look up Clampco, you could probably figure it out. But it's like it's pretty informal sort of. It's like a guy, and he's just sort of building them by himself. And we had a lot of back and forths on the phone, and but it's a really good. I'm really pleased with it. It's really good quality, and I don't know. I would say not affordable, but like very reasonable. I think we may pay about $2,000 for ours. Holds about 500 pounds of a kind of a poultry manure based fertilizer. Has the 4 outlets on it, and it's good. It's holding up so far for us. So that's what we use.
I've got to head out as well. Thank you guys so much for your time. Thanks, Dana, for all the food you thought. And Tenzin, we'll have to get you two and Jeff to write our next grant, I think. So
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, great food for thought. But stay well, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.